We recognize this figure as the patron saint of polite morality, the bearded sage of fortune cookies and gentle aphorisms about respecting your elders. But the historical record tells a different story. Confucius never intended to be a wandering teacher. His original ambition was to design the mechanics of absolute political control. In 497 BCE, he was the Minister of Justice for the state of Lu. He was a high-ranking official, using his position to dismantle the power of independent noble families and centralize authority under a single disciplined administration. The benevolent philosopher of the modern world is a carefully constructed image that masks a politician who lost his grip on the state and spent the rest of his life attempting to manage the fallout. Geopolitical rivals in the state of Qi saw his efficiency as a threat. They sent the ruler of Lu a gift designed to paralyze the government, 80 beautiful dancers and a fleet of fine horses. The strategy worked. The ruler abandoned his duties for 3 days to indulge in the distraction, effectively halting the progress of Confucius's administrative reforms. Confucius responded by resigning his post in protest. He left the capital and began 13 years of wandering exile, looking for another ruler who would listen to his theories. While history frames this as a noble choice, it was a total abandonment of the levers of power. He traded his influence over the state for the life of a traveling intellectual, because he couldn't navigate a single palace distraction. Imagine if he hadn't walked away. What if instead of choosing exile, he had decided that the ruler's weakness was an opportunity to consolidate total authority? In this timeline, the concept of li, or ritual, is weaponized. It ceases to be a guide for social manners and becomes a rigid administrative code where every movement and every social interaction is a matter of state compliance. He deploys his network of loyal students as a private intelligence service. They don't just teach morality, they purge the royal court of disharmonious elements to restore what they call the celestial order. He emerges not as a king, but as the first great chancellor of a totalitarian meritocracy. Under this model, the state functions as a single organism, where the ruler's vision is enforced by the unyielding weight of ritual law. Valuing centralized order above all else, an industrial revolution begins centuries early. Technology is developed not for individual profit, but for the state's total oversight. Beijing serves as the central hub for a global ethical network. The internet in this world operates on behavior tracking algorithms rather than advertising revenue. If the system detects disharmonious behavior, it automatically limits your access to basic transportation, housing, and food. This state calculates your worth through a precise equation.
V represents your life quota. It increases based on E, your education, and S, your social contribution. However, this is divided by O, your egoistic deviation. Any self-interest shrinks your value. In a world dominated by this level of efficiency, the concept of Western democracy is studied as a historical curiosity, a localized instability that the network eventually corrected. Geopolitics follow the same pattern of consolidation. Rome becomes a Western protectorate of the empire, and massive 14th century fleets colonize the globe to export the administrative code of the chancellor. Mandarin is the global standard. The chaotic fluctuations of Wall Street never existed. The world economy is managed by the temple of balance, where sustainability is enforced by imperial decree. This is an engineered global environment. It is stable and predictable, but it relies on every individual operating within the exact parameters of the state's ethical software.
Beat of silence. Back in our reality, none of this came to pass. Confucius died as a man who had failed to convince a single ruler to implement his vision in full. He fell for the great intellectual trap, the assumption that a good idea is strong enough to displace a powerful person. Centuries later, the same emperors he failed to influence took his name and his philosophy and used them to justify their own authority. They turned his calls for virtue into a permanent requirement for obedience. His teachings were repurposed to serve the state, because he chose to be its teacher rather than its architect. The history of Confucius provides a direct lesson in statecraft. A vision for the world is only as effective as the mechanism used to enforce it. Ideas that are taught in the streets remain philosophical exercises. Ideas that occupy the seat of government become the boundaries of reality.
When you see a quote from Confucius today, Remember that you are hearing the voice of a man who held the keys to the state and handed them back because he prioritized his moral protest over the actual control of the future. He spent his life waiting for virtue to change the world. But power doesn't wait for permission. It simply fills the space left behind by those who walk away.